The Healing Spring Show, healing families and communities by breaking the stigma of addiction and expanding the scope of recovery. Now here's your host, John Edmondson.
Well, they say that experience can be the best teacher, but can also be a wonderful form of therapy to help you heal, to grow, and bring your best self forward. Today we have Katrena Hart from Bridging Harts to come talk more about it. Katrena, welcome.
Hey.
Yeah, glad you're here today.
Great to be with you.
Show.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I want to make sure everyone knows who you are and what you do and share some of your experience with it. It's been phenomenal to watch you and see all the people that you've trained and helped.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's start. Tell us, who is Katrena Hart? What does she do?
Well, gosh, I don't know. Well, right now I'm sitting here. So I am a psychotherapist. I run a private practice in Allen, and I also have a training program. So I teach other clinicians how to use psychodrama, and I also am trained in bioenergetic analysis, which is a somatic relational body work, kind of like Peter Levine talks about SE, somatic experiencing, but it's just a little bit different. So I use psychodrama and body work to help people overcome their trauma and become their best self.
Wow.
I think that might be who I am.
That sounds
at least this week.
This week. So let's break a couple of things down real quick.
Yeah.
You said psychodrama.
Psychodrama.
So people think of that, they think, what is that, like we're going to be more dramatic than we used to be?
No.
Or what is it?
Maybe.
It could be.
Could be.
What does it look like? What is psychodrama? How do we use it?
Okay, so what I would say, how do we use it? So psychodrama is a method of psychotherapy that was designed by Dr. Jacob L. Moreno, and we use a lot of different ways to help people get in touch with who they are. So I brought a few props here. So,
all right.
So for example, let's say you walk into a room and it's a group. Usually psychodrama is done in a group, and all these words like creative and loved, but then there's some of the more tough words like threatened and outraged are all on the ground. So I might say, in this moment, right now, in this moment, while you're in this group for the first time, what's the feeling that comes for you? And they might say, I feel exposed or excited to be here. And then I might move a little bit more into, if they're there for a trauma workshop or a self-care workshop, I might say, choose a word that represents how you feel about working on that particular issue. And they might say willing or humble, things like that. So using language and also pictures. So here's a bunch of these are bridges. I might have a bunch of bridges out on the ground and letting people say.
We got a couple more here. We can bring them all up.
Yeah. So
we're looking at all these different ones.
Right.
Wow. And so with each one, you just kind of pick a picture or?
Yeah, it's what we call criteria. So I say, somebody might say, I'm feeling this way. I'm feeling kind of broken, but there's some life around, some flowers coming up, and I'm in the nature. As far as my self-care, or my self-care might feel like this, right? Like it's whoosh, crashing. I'm really in need of self-care. Or it's black and white. It's dark. Gray.
Right.
And I need more life to it. So using images, using words to help people to get in touch with what's happening in their body to start up the group. And then once we get people warmed up, we want to move into their story. Psychodrama is really a place to tell your story. And we're in such a polarized time right now where people are struggling to tell their story,
right,
or to say, does my story matter? And what's happening even intergenerational with the stories that people are holding and need to be shared. So we move into the group and we find ways to move into somebody's story. So somebody might come in and say that they want to work on recently having been assaulted in some way. Could be sex assault, could be somebody stole something or they felt emotionally injured. I don't really have an agenda about what they define as assault. And then I'll say, well, when you think about what happened, take me to a place that matches what that feels like. They might take me to the actual event of where something took place. Or one time we even just went into a nature scene and the person said, I need to feel like I'm regrounded in the earth. And, we had water and a mountain and a rock. And, we're just creating this with like fabrics, props.
Like different things over here. I saw that we have like some fabrics. We have a chain.
So like that blue might be the water.
Oh, so this is, for people who are watching who've never heard of this isn't talk therapy or just talk therapy. Then we're not sitting down having a conversation about different stuff.
No, and it's really hard to explain too. It's
beginning to make sense. So this isn't like come down, sit, and say, "Hey, I'm going to tell you my feelings, and you're going to reflect them back to me." Although that's important,
right?
Very good. It probably starts that way,
right?
But what you're saying is you're allowing people to tell their stories,
yes,
to express it, and it's very creative. And the whole room could be used for this. Am I hearing you right?
Yeah, I will use everything in the space. Everything that they say. So if they say, I just really feel like I lost my relationship with my spirituality during that assault. And so then I might say, well, what is your spirituality? And maybe it's that nature scene that we just spoke of. So I said, well, take me into that nature scene. And they'll put things on the ground. And sometimes it's just one or two things, like a piece of fabric. Sometimes people are like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I don't know, just go get something to represent the water. And they come up with this blue thing. That's perfect. We just lay it on the ground. And then all of a sudden, as we get moving, it's as if they're near the water. And sometimes we can even have, in Alexa, we can make it make babbling noise or things like that, water noises. But then they have a conversation with their spirituality. Whether that's God or the universe or however they term spirituality, I follow their knowing. And then I say, become your spirituality. What would your spirituality say to you about this assault? And the stuff people come up with is just very profound. Very profound. I can't, I don't know, just recently we were doing a 3-day intensive on trauma, and there was a moment when we just needed to make the whole room dark. And it was sort of like, ooh, dark. Okay, all right. So we made the room pretty, and it got dark quickly. You close the curtains, and all of a sudden it's like,
you can't see.
Your eyes adjust, and the person needed that in order to feel safe enough to share the story. And then the story just came out, and it was so beautiful. And of course, we brought the light back in just a little bit at a time, and sharing somebody's story in action, allowing other people to play parts. Because for this assault and spirituality story, we then choose somebody from the group to become spirituality. And that is what that person needed.
So you're saying that there's a couple of things you're saying there which are really powerful.
A lot, yes.
That's why I was slowed down, because it's incredible.
Please
so you're saying you experience the story, not
you
just
experience
tell
the story, yeah.
And people are actually witnessing. So you said you're pulling from a group. So normally this is a group experience?
Well, the group becomes the story.
The group becomes the story.
The group becomes the story.
Tell me about that part. Group becomes the story. So there's people sitting around.
Yeah.
What happens? How does that begin?
Okay, so we have spirituality on the stage now, and we have the person that was assaulted. We know that. And then I might say, well...
So those are people are acting that out.
People are acting that out.
Okay.
People get a little nervous, like, oh, I'm going to do it wrong or not say it quite right.
Stage fright.
Yeah, but once they get up there, they are in the story, and they become entranced with the person telling the story we call the protagonist. Okay. And the person playing spirituality would be the auxiliary ego, because they're all parts of self, really.
Oh, so now we're taking each part of ourself, putting it up on a stage. We have this group, and we're pulling from people within the group to represent these different parts of who we are.
Yes.
So we're not just talking about it, we're seeing it in front of us, like a mirror.
Yeah. And then I might say, choose something in this nature scene that represents the assault. And they might say, this tree over here that looks like a lightning bolt went through it. And that is metaphor by itself. And then I say, choose somebody in the room to be the assault. And then they'll choose somebody from the group to come up and be the assault. So then I might even have the assault talking to spirituality.
Wow, so the person who represents assault and the person who represents spirituality are having a conversation.
Sure.
Just like in our minds,
Just like in our minds.
Isn't that the funny thing? Because we go all day and we have all this kind of random chit-chatter that goes back and forth.
Yeah. Well, psychodrama means it's the psyche, and drama is change. And it's the psychology of our mind. It's what's happening in our mind. So if we can take everything out of our mind and put it on a stage in story form and let people play the different roles, there's an expansion that happens.
Yeah, because the brain loves a story. It always
People
gravitates
love
to it.
stories.
People love stories.
We heal through stories. And I remember my teacher, Dorothy Satin, she wrote this book, Real is Better Than Perfect. And she would often say that what happened to you happened in a room alone while you were all by yourself, and that we heal in rooms with other people as we tell our stories.
Wow.
And so that was always so profound to me. And it was true for me because I came through psychodrama pretty broken. And it was through psychodrama that I was really able to uncover who I think I was supposed to be in a way.
Yeah, and so Dorothy Satin, you said she wrote a book. Can you tell us about Dorothy?
So Dorothy and Mort Satin, Satten, they were my teachers. And so 1994, actually in a room about a mile down the
Is that
way.
right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Julie Patrick's. I did many, many psychodramas, trying to understand why I behaved the way I did. Dorothy would often say, your trauma, if it's unresolved, will take away from who you're supposed to be. And as you do this work and your story is known and you become empowered through your story, then the trauma makes up who you're supposed to be.
The trauma can take away from who you're supposed to be. And then when you work through it, you said the psychodrama, so it's like a session.
Yeah.
It helps you become who you were meant to be?
I think so. It's like the tapestry of your life. So I'll share something about my own self that's fairly private. But I was sexually abused growing up. And I remember as I was working through my story, my father at one point came to me and said, he wanted to kind of go get the person.
Beat the guy up.
Go beat that guy up. And I was like, Dad, I love you so much. And I can appreciate your desire to protect what had happened to our family at that time. But that experience has made me who I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be somebody that can sit in a room where it's completely pitch black and let people cry and not be afraid of that, and know that if we continue with the story, the empowerment will come. So, for example, with this nature scene and the assault, so the assault might talk to spirituality, right? And then I might say, well, what is this really about? And then they'll say, well, it's about climbing the mountain. And they'll say, oh, there's a mountain in our scene. And then I'll get somebody to be the mountain. And they'll reverse roles and become the mountain. And the mountain will say, listen, you're going to be okay from this assault. And you're on the mountain. Right now, you just have to get in your tent and sit for a little bit. Just be here. It's not time to go further up the mountain right now. It's just time to recover from what just happened. And sometimes people just need to know that. And then they can be until they're ready to continue on their journey up the mountain. And so all these metaphors help people to integrate what has happened to them.
Yeah.
And that's been true for me. So as I've been in my own story, shared my story, as I've role reversed with spirituality for myself, I began to understand more about who I was supposed to be. And I'm grateful for what has happened to me, including the injuries, because they're an important part of my character,
Who you are.
and my value system.
Yeah, it's what you said before. Initially, it's what can take us away from who we're meant to be, but then it can lead us to what we are meant to be.
Absolutely.
So, like, even in my heart, I hear that. It touches my heart to hear that happen to you. And like, kind of like your dad, that part of me, it comes out like, so sorry that happened to you.
Right. But I say,
At the
don't
same
apologize.
time,
It's made
part of
me
your
so
story.
strong and connected also. Like when I do a psychodrama about my own life, I can watch people change through their stories from being in my story. And that's pretty cool.
That's powerful.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you speak about that a little bit? So some people are watching, they're going to be like, what is therapy?
Right,
Some
sure.
people we talk about addiction, we talk about life, imperfections, and therapists watch this too. So how could I become a psychodramatist?
Oh, well, that's easy. So
I would just call you.
Come hang out with me. Right. So how do you become a psychodramatist?
Because it sounds like you actually have to do some of your own work here. It's not like you can just read a book and do it, or
the training often creates spaces, that's how I became a psychodramatist, is I would go to these workshops and learn through observation and learn through experience. That's really how I came to it myself. And so I run a training program in Collin County area, and that begins in January. And we've had lawyers, psychiatrists, retired people once in a while, if they're appropriate for the training program. Teachers are great, professors, and then psychotherapists. So the training program is not just designed for clinicians, but in general, it tends to probably be 70 to 80% clinicians.
Clinical.
We've had pastors in there. And
Wow.
so you come and we hang out in a room for about 5 hours a month, and we talk about psychodrama. We talk about the history, where psychodrama came from. We talk a lot also about sociometry. This is Anne Hale's book about sociometry.
I was going to ask about that. I saw the book. So sociometry, what would sociometry mean?
Sociometry is the measurement of how people are connected and why they're connected. So, for example, in this group where the person is working on the assault and the spirituality and climbing the mountain, we would say, Dr. Moreno would say, that the exact right people are in the room, that we're co-creating the experience of this story, and that her choice of picking somebody to be the tree that was assaulted, that lightning rod that had gone through that tree, that person needed to play that role because there was some perhaps unexposed trauma within themselves and they hadn't talked about it.
Wait, so you're saying it's not just the person who's kind of on the stage just getting therapy.
No, yeah.
It's everybody. So someone, maybe they were chosen for a reason.
Absolutely.
And that's part of their work too.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. And
So this is like a win-win situation here.
Well, I think so.
Yeah.
It has been for me. There's been many times where I've participated in somebody's psychodrama and then sat down and said, wow, that was my story.
That was yours,
It's
yeah.
my story on the stage, and I didn't even tell it. And it was profound to see how this other person worked through their own belief system or value system to recover more of themselves. And so the same is true. So when we all sit down after the story has been done, there's a phase, there's 3 phases: warm up, the action phase, and then the sharing phase.
Sharing, okay.
So in the sharing, this person who took on the role of the tree of the assault would often say, I've never told anybody, but when I was 18, I was assaulted.
Yeah.
And so it was so powerful for her to acknowledge and honor her own assault. So that's sociometry. It's who we choose, why we choose, how we choose. And this is a tip of the iceberg. I mean, I could probably teach a 30-day workshop on just sociometry. There's so much to it.
And I've heard mentioned before there are examples even in not just therapy, but in military history or in prison systems. Can you mention that a little bit?
Well, sociometry really began, I would say, in like Sing Sing Prison or the Hudson School for Girls. Dr. Moreno was asked to come in, and he would ask the girls, for example, at the Hudson School for Girls, questions about who in this community they felt the most comfortable with or who they did not feel comfortable with, and who had something in common with them. And he would create this matrix, and he would design where people should sit for lunch together or who should room together. So, for example, in Sing Sing Prison, they're having a lot of arguing and fighting in the prison. And when Moreno would come in and he would do his matrix to figure out who would be the best roommates to be in the jail cell together, what they found is they had less fighting, and lo and behold, these 2 people would end up being healing agents for one another in some various way. And so that was a value because it created more peace, more harmony for them there. The way I like to use sociometry, though, is like, let's say we're starting, well, I teach a lot in classrooms. Like I'll go to a university classroom, and I often go to where they're teaching psychotherapy, master's programs. And so I'll go in the classroom and I'll say, okay, everybody stand up in a circle, and I'll say, everybody put your hand on the shoulder of the person in this classroom you would choose to take your best friend for therapy to. So if your best friend is depressed or feeling really down about something or going through a divorce or something, who would you want them to be their therapist? And then they put the hand on the shoulder of this person, and the whole group would come together, and all these hands are here and there, and they have to kind of move around each other. Right, yeah. And it's always so cool because people are like, oh, you picked me. I could be your best friend's therapist. And usually they have no idea. They have no idea that they would be chosen for that role, and it's super important to them.
Yeah, and that's that powerful piece that we always talk about in therapy is bringing out the stuff we have no idea it's even there.
Right.
It's in the dark.
Right.
And then bring out the things within a group that is there that's in the dark.
Absolutely.
So instead of just saying, okay, who here is the person you would choose and talk about it, and people kind of awkwardly look at each other, you're putting them into action, which in a way is kind of safer, it seems.
It seems to be quite lovely. Now, of course, there might be somebody who's like, well, why didn't anybody pick me?
I was wondering about that.
Right?
Yeah. Then what happens?
So we'll often say, I'll watch the group and kind of how they're processing it. I might say, who would choose you? Because you're becoming a therapist. People know your skill set, and everybody has an answer. And they'll say, oh, Jill would choose me, or Bob would choose me, or whoever. And it just feels good. Or if I'm in the beginning of a group, like, for example, I just did this 3-day psychodrama intensive on power, sex, and money. Little provocative topics, but
that's pretty heavy topics right there.
It was intense.
I wonder if anybody felt threatened by the
maybe appreciated.
Appreciative.
Definitely, they felt inhibited.
I would guess defensive came up too, right?
And we did work with shame.
Shame.
We worked with shame.
Yeah.
But we ended up, I think, with the group feeling incredibly, profoundly connected.
Yeah, this is fun how this works, by the way. I like this. It brings more spontaneity into a room.
Spontaneity is exactly what psychodrama is about.
It's the key. So you did this workshop with these 3 major topics.
Right. So I let them just say a little bit when we started, and then I literally said, who in the room do you think is likely to be your teacher? And so everybody in the room went and put their hand on the shoulder of somebody. And the interesting thing about that is they really didn't know each other. They didn't know much about each other.
This was a feeling.
It was just an intuition. Or a gut check. And people had said a little something, but it brought the group together like, oh, we have a purpose here. We have something to offer here. How do I show up in that way? And so they start to bond right out of the gate. And then they would talk about that throughout the workshop, like, oh, yeah, now I know why I picked you as my teacher. And so I don't know how to explain it fully. It's one of these things on some levels you have to experience it.
But they're just going to have to call you. They're going to have to look up your website and do it.
Don't be afraid of the name. It's not really that scary. It's a lot of fun. We actually laugh our butts off a ton.
Yeah, it looks that. Yeah, you have other stuff over here. You have some, do you use these buttons sometimes?
Yes. So we got a yes button.
I'm going to say yes to life. What else we got here?
Say, no, I don't want to talk about that.
Gotcha.
And, one of the most important things that people can learn to do is to say,
hey, my bad.
My bad, or
sorry.
I'm sorry.
Really sorry.
I'd like to take a brief moment to offer my apologies.
So these, I even have some that have some curse words too, but we decided not to bring those
there.
out.
They're in a bucket off to the side somewhere.
Actually,
they're over there. Yeah, that's for another show.
And so.
But that's important too, right? Because we have to express all of who we are.
Sometimes you need to say that's BS. That is BS. I'm not tolerating that. For example, somebody's going through perhaps a divorce and they feel like they're being exploited in some way.
Right.
We'll literally have somebody having the BS button, right? And they'll sit in the corner, and then if something's happening, somebody will go, yep, and that's BS. That's BS. And it brings laughter to the stage. So while we might be talking about something that's tense and heavy, and then somebody's like, BS, and we're cracking up at the same time.
Which breaks defenses, right?
It breaks down all the defenses.
All defenses, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's amazing because then you're talking about how it's so much easier to receive.
Yeah. Well, it even says on Dr. Moreno, who created the method, it says on his grave, here lies the man who brought laughter back into psychiatry.
Wow.
So I think maybe that's why I like it. I can manage the intensity because we also allow the humor and the playfulness, and, you can't cry about everything. You got to laugh about a few things, and depending on the protagonist, there are great times to just laugh about something that is so profoundly absurd that has happened.
Yeah, so sometimes therapy isn't just about the tears, the anger.
No.
And we're finding our joy, we're finding our laughter.
It's all about finding joy. In fact, on my wall, there in the group room where I do psychodrama, there are 2 quotes. One says, "Once you've seen someone's psychodrama, you cannot help but to love them." And that was true for me. Like, the people who learn to know me through psychodrama. In fact, I'm actually driving to Houston today to be with people who I've been doing psychodrama with for 27 years.
27 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's when I first started. And we meet twice a year. We get together and that's how we practice our self-care. We get together and we, act out things that we're struggling with or we need help with. And see, also remember the story about nature and the trauma. Sometimes I have to step into my own spirituality and speak to myself. Sometimes I have to say, listen, girl, hey, like, you need to get this together. Like, this is not okay. And sometimes it's from that role that I can impact myself when I'm a little stuck. So anyhow, we get together and we do psychodrama on each other. But I'm going to Houston because a friend of ours has passed, and we're going to actually celebrate his life tonight. And I met him, Will Cannon. Shout out to Will, who's passed on in 1994 in Houston, where he would offer psychodrama in his law office. He's an attorney. Lots of attorneys use psychodrama. It's very much the thing these days. And so...
Attorneys use psychodrama?
They do.
How does that work?
Well, attorneys will come to my office and they'll bring a client of theirs. Sometimes it's a personal injury case or a criminal case. And I will help the attorneys to understand the client better. So I'll bring my psychodrama peeps in, and the lawyers will say, I would like to understand how my client made this choice, or why my client was in this situation with these people.
Right.
How did this get set up? Or even, my client is so angry and defensive. I need to get beyond the anger and defensiveness. I need to understand what's going on in their heart. Or when that car accident happened, if it's a personal injury case, what was impacted in this person's life? Because a lot of times people cannot articulate it
with words. Yeah.
And so when we start to tell their story, we just see so many sides of people, and it just comes alive. But back to the other quote on my wall. The other quote says, the best revenge is to live a juicy life. And that's a Dorothy quote.
What does that mean? The best revenge is a juicy life. That sounds cool.
We're talking about joy, right? Like sometimes when we have an assault, we need somebody to say, Could I be more sorry? Yeah, right? Or no, this will never happen again.
Right.
I'm going to protect myself. Or the yes to life, right? Right? And so it says the best revenge is to live a juicy life. So if I go back to my own sexual assault in my history, if I'm down in the dump or hurting myself or living a life where I'm inhibited, threatened, shameful, I am still in trauma. I'm not living who I'm supposed to be. The best revenge is a juicy life. A juicy life to me is vibrancy, aliveness, willing to say you matter or that I'm sorry, willing to be vulnerable. Brene Brown, she just is so great.
Brene Brown.
Shout out to Brene, who, by the way, I know that she's from Houston and she loves psychodrama. Wow. She almost came to join us as our keynote speaker a year ago, 2 years ago, when it was in Dallas and the dates did not work. But she's really talking about shame and vulnerability and how do we get out of that? Well, what does she say? You got to tell your story and you got to put it out there in whatever format you can. And so often just the words aren't enough. So come on in and let's create your scene, the scene of nature or the scene where the assault happened, or maybe it's the scene of who you want to be. Maybe you keep saying, I want to be married. I want to be married. I want to have a family, and it's not happening. So sometimes we go to the future and we imagine it. And I remember we did this one time recently with somebody who wanted to be dating. And he was like, oh, I always kind of, downplay what I say when I really might be interested in somebody. So we played out a scene where the person had a chance to say, "Hi, I'm kind of into you. I'm digging you." And like not too long later, the person came and was like, "Okay, so it like literally happened. Like I had this moment where I got a chance to say what I felt, not what my head, my fear felt, but what I felt.
The heart.
And so often when we play out what you want to have happen, it starts to trickle in, or we start to see little moments and we do them differently. Psychodrama is about retraining, role training the brain. Psychodrama is about mindfulness. It's about being in your body. It's about being in the present. I'm going to Asia in 2 weeks. I teach psychodrama in Asia, Taiwan, Hong Kong. Hong Kong really needs some psychodrama right now, so I'm hoping that goes well. But, the importance of sharing and being known, no matter what the country is or where the oppression is, it's just important.
Yeah, to be seen.
To be seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I was going to say is in Asia, I'm teaching on mindfulness and psychodrama, and at first I was like, well, I don't know a lot about mindfulness, but the more I studied it, I realized, I'm doing mindfulness, actually. And so when I go, I just say, mindfulness is about slowing down and recognizing what's true. What's true is there was an assault, and allowing it. This tree, this lightning bolt, that's what the assault feels like to me, and allowing it. And the spirituality that I feel disconnected from, that's of mattering. Let's allow that with kindness. There's nothing wrong with an assault pulling you away from your spirituality. In fact, that's exactly what it does. But it's the psychodrama model and the telling of the story and recognizing that mountain where people can come back to what's important. It's time for me now just to be in that tent and to recover and repair before I go back out onto the journey of the mountain. That's mindfulness, being in the now.
In the now.
And
mindfulness in action.
Yeah, mindfulness in action. And then we cannot attach. Then we don't have to be in so much suffering about it, and we can be known. Psychodrama is it's tricky. It does so many things at one time. And the person doesn't even really know, except that when they sit down at the end of it, they know that they felt heard and that their story mattered. And that not only did it matter for them to tell their story, but it mattered for the people in the room that heard the story, because you can see and hear when the other people say, yeah, that's me too. That the protagonist knows that not only did my telling my story help me, it helped everybody in the room.
Yeah.
And the whole room knows it. And it's just
powerful.
It is sacred.
Yeah, sacred.
I'm so lucky to do what I do.
Yeah, I'm so lucky I got to have you on the show today. This has been great.
Yeah.
I learned so much. Thank you.
For sure.
So if people want to, and I hope everyone does, they look up Katrena and they learn from her. I mean, if you're a lawyer, you just want to make changes in your life, you want to get in relationships, business, all these different things, how do they find you?
Well, Facebook, Twitter. Okay, let's see. I got practicum students doing
There's
stuff.
a good list. There we go.
So we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn. We have a website, of course, but it's Bridging Harts. So my last name is Hart, H-A-R-T. So Bridging Harts. That seemed to make a lot of sense to me. So look us up. We're in Allen. And, of course, you guys do psychodrama at Healing Springs. And when Melissa called me to find out about doing that, I was so honored and touched that you guys really understood the power of the method and you wanted to do it well. And I shout out to Jody and Billy, who's not there now, but she was the beginning.
They were awesome. They got it started.
And I love that Jody is looking at how do we do psychodrama and equine therapy. And
she's phenomenal.
Jody is
stunning. Shout out to Joe. You are awesome. I get to see that at the ranch all the time. The change in the clients. I walk by the door and things are always going on. These different props are happening and they're coming out different. Yeah.
Well, the one main thing I want people to get from this too is Tian Dayton was our keynote speaker one year, and she just stood up there in front of all of us, and she said it like it is. She said, let psychodrama be easy. It's not that hard. It's not that complicated. The spontaneity and creativity is in you. Just let it shine and learn a little try a little, learn a little more, try a little more, and all of a sudden you're doing psychodrama. It's cool stuff.
Cool stuff.
Yeah.
So, Katrena, thank you so
Yeah.
much for being on the show. Really glad you were here.